CIA. You know, all this time I had this weekend, a long weekend, and I kept thinking, you know, there was a time when there was a period in which a reasonable person might have voted for Trump when they heard he's going to rebuild the country. He's going to be a great executive because he made all this money. He has not rebuilt anything. He gave all the money to the rich. And in terms of the government he was supposedly going to run, he's attacked it from day one. In other words, instead of being a chief executive, he's a chief attacker of the entire U.S. government. It's like he never took it over.
So I wonder...
By the way, there are a lot of these cases where a reasonable person would have voted for him, and he's betrayed them. Go ahead.
Yes, and I think there are so many Americans who have family members who work for the government, public servants, civil servants. And here is Donald Trump, as well as the Republicans now, who disparage the very, work that they do. These public servants...
Because they do it.
Well, because, in fact, they're challenging him. They're standing up to him. And I think more people that stand up against Donald Trump will actually show how much he has failed to follow through on what the American people expect, which is honesty and integrity in government.
Do you think he's sane?
Donald Trump?
Yeah. Let me ask you about logic. When he sees a logical report from an intelligence agency that some people have worked on for weeks, and they get it down to an executive summary that he's willing to read, do you think he's reading it like a person would read something like, let me learn something here?
No, I don't. I'm not a medical doctor. I cannot determine whether he's sane or not. But I certainly believe that he views the world through his own prism, which is, how does this affect me? How am I going to take either advantage of this or defend against it in order to protect his own interests? And that's why when I think about him now going off to the NATO summit, he looks at everything through a dollar sign prism.
Yeah.
How can we cut back in terms of, the expenditures to NATO, as opposed to thinking strategically, how are we going to ensure that NATO, working with our allies, is going to help protect this country's national security? So Donald Trump has a very, very unique, I think, perspective on everything that he looks at and everything that is brought to him. How does it affect him politically, and how is he going to, in fact, take advantage of it?
Well, here's an example of weird thinking, because I ring it up about brain power here. President Trump today cited a Time magazine interview with Ukrainian President Zelensky to claim that Zelensky has just again announced that President Trump had done nothing wrong with respect to Ukraine and our interactions or phone calls. But a reading of Zelensky's full quote to Time magazine shows that he not only defended his integrity for not caving in to Trump, but acknowledged the pressure that President Trump put on him. Zelensky said, look, I never talked to the president from the position of a quid pro quo. That's not my thing. I don't want us to look like beggars, but you have to understand, we're at war. If you're our strategic partner, then you can't go blocking anything for us. I think that's just about fairness. Well, who's the guy up blocking him? He's right there talking about the president blocking it. And Trump reads it and says, this exonerates me. No, it indicts you.
Well, Zelensky clearly is taking a big swipe at Donald Trump, saying that if you're a strategic ally, do not block things such as the military assistance. But I think Zelensky recognizes now that Trump is in a weaker position. So I think he's willing to stand up against him, which I think is critically important.
What did you make watching, as an intelligence expert, the Republican statement tonight, the thing we read a few moments ago, and just a moment on the show now, about their claims? They're not thinking at all about the fact of what the impeachment's about. History books will be filled with why this president was impeached when he's impeached. They're not talking about that.
They have no interest in finding the truth or being honest with the American people. Clearly, they have bet on Mr. Trump, and they're going to continue to stay with him. It's the bet that they've all made together. So they cannot refute any of these allegations based on substance. They're going to continue to try to disparage those that stood up against him. And so I think the Republicans are just going to, continue to look blindly at this impeachment.
It's like the Vichy French. They had to root for the Germans once they cut their deal.
Yeah, they had no choice.
Once they cut the deal with the Nazis, the Nazis had to win.
Right.
After correcting his discredited claim last week that Ukraine hacked into the Democratic National Committee email server, Republican Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana is again arguing that Ukraine interfered in the 2016 election. Here's how Kennedy was challenged by our Chuck Todd yesterday on Meet the Press.
I think both Russia and Ukraine meddled in the 2016 election, but the fact that Russia was so aggressive does not exclude the fact that President Poroshenko actively worked for Secretary Clinton. Now, if I'm wrong, and if all these journalists are wrong...
I mean, my goodness, wait a minute. Senator Kennedy, you now have the president of Ukraine saying he actively worked for the Democratic nominee for president. I mean, now, come on. I mean, I got to put up... You realize the only other person selling this argument outside the United States is this man, Vladimir Putin. You've done exactly what the Russian operation is trying to get American politicians to do. Are you at all concerned that you've been duped?
No, because you just read the articles.
Well, in claiming interference, Kennedy's citing articles from 2016 about Ukrainian politicians who openly opposed Trump's candidacy, and he stood by his remarks yesterday. Anyway, however, Politico is now reporting that the Republican-controlled Senate Intelligence Committee thoroughly investigated that theory and found no evidence that Ukraine waged a top-down interference campaign akin to the Kremlin's efforts to help Trump win in 2016. You know, these guys, they cite an article that was, in fact, planted by the propagandists and say, well, that proves my point.
Yeah. Well, first of all, Senator John Kennedy is a great discredit to his name.
Secondly, we can agree on that one.
Secondly, he's not being duped. He knows that he's being dishonest. He knows that he's trying to defend and protect Donald Trump at all costs. And so he's not going to be honest with the American people. And so clearly he's continued to propagate this narrative that the Russians continue to feed. And that's why he and others are allowing this narrative about Ukrainian interference in the 2016 election to go forward, despite every indication from the intelligence community that it was Russia that engaged in this systematic sweeping interference in the election that helped Donald Trump get elected.
You know, in every Democratic or Republican convention, I've been to a lot of them for the last 30, 40 years, they inevitably praise their previous presidents. So it's the Democrats, it's FDR, it's Harry Truman, it's Jack Kennedy. Republicans, it's always Teddy Roosevelt, it's Eisenhower and Reagan now. I don't think this guy's going to be on their list, this guy Trump. I'm sorry. A few years from now, they'll pretend they never met the guy. They'll do to him what he's done to everybody he's ever worked with. I didn't know him that well. Director John Brennan, thank you, sir, for your service to the country.